At first, my family was against it. It was a pretty difficult time, and singers weren't very well regarded in Haiti under Duvalier. You're a musician, but you're also a politician because sometimes you're forced to sing something that is hard to digest. Musicians have no borders. They travel, they go everywhere. They're accepted everywhere. There were Quebecers I admired and appreciated, and Quebec opened its arms to me. I found it extraordinary to take my chance as a singer here. I was the singer who filled Le Perchoir d'Haïti in Montréal, and that's why the owner gave me a renewable contract. Not to blow my own trumpet, but I've accepted that the community calls me the patriarch, and I represent and defend them. The day I can no longer sing, it will be my duty to hand over the microphone to my compatriots. I have never regretted it. I've never regretted anything.
Known as the patriarch of Haitian music, Joe Trudeau composed over 300 songs. In the 1960s, he was a mainstay at Montreal's Le Perchoir d'Haïti, a vibrant place of cultural exchange between Haitian and Quebecois artists and intellectuals.
People told me it wasn't a good idea for a girl to be a lawyer, particularly a colored girl. So I went ahead. Though many things remain to be done in the legal field to give women both the equality and protection to which they are entitled, I think there is a wonderful field of opportunity for girls in the legal profession. It's too bad that a colored girl has to outshine others to secure a position, particularly in a field some feel a woman shouldn't be operating in. There are legal problems all over Canada, and women must concern themselves with them. Conditions taken for granted today were obtained by those who struggled in years past. The most important thing to do is choose a goal and aim for it, even if sometimes the goal seems too high or impossible. It's having something definite to work towards that counts.
In 1954, Violet King became the first Black woman to practice law in Canada. She was the first Black person to graduate from law school in Alberta and the only woman in her graduating class.
Immediately after the explosion, my office was filled with the injured. I was the only doctor in the district and had only my housekeeper and a Pullman porter for assistance. They were very severe cases, and even some people who had been turned away from the hospital came to my office. In spite of the warnings, I worked steadily both night and day, doing outside work on the hundreds who were scattered all over, though the horse was up to his knees in the blizzard. After 4 days, I went to City Hall and was given 2 nurses. Work was still very heavy, and eventually 8 more nurses were sent. Weeks later, I still have upwards of 51 cases due to the explosion and the conditions it created. I have not charged a cent to anyone since the explosion and will still do relief work, but now I must snatch a half-hour's sleep.
In the hours, days, and weeks following the Halifax explosion, hundreds of people were treated free of charge at the home of Dr. Clement Ligore, the first Black doctor to practice in Nova Scotia.
Nobody ever told me to sing. I'm the daughter of a Baptist minister. I was born singing. I couldn't always pay my bills. The Halifax Ladies Music Club took a great interest in me. They arranged scholarships for me. And from that time on, things just sort of gathered impetus. I always feel it was Toronto which discovered me. I really made my debut there when I sang in November 1941. The next day, I received a contract.
When I no more behold thee.
I toured everywhere, but often encountered obstacles on account of my race. I am immensely proud of the enormous advances we are making, in spite of the efforts of those who would deny us equality. What success I have attained has been due to Canadians, and especially Maritimers, who've seen talent in me and have given me the opportunity to develop, to be of some worth.
Portia White was the first African-Canadian concert singer to win international acclaim. She is considered one of the best classical contraltos of the 20th century.
Long way from Nashville, and mama, I tell you that. Performed from Montreal to Boston to Los Angeles. But Toronto, that's my chosen home. Sure, when I'm walking down Yonge Street, I see some funny people who have the nerve to point the finger at me. And grin and smile and whisper. My song was #2 on local radio. Sold 10,000 in Toronto alone. Turned down Ed Sullivan because they asked me to remove my makeup. Wouldn't do American Bandstand because of their segregation policies. I was just being me, never tried to explain myself to anyone. And besides, none of that don't worry, Jackie, because I know I look good. Got a new way of loving, baby. Thought I want to teach it to you.
Jackie Shane was a pioneer transgender soul singer, a central figure in the Toronto R&B scene. She helped shape what we know as the Toronto sound.
I don't care what the law is. I will never be a slave. That word, I hate it. It rests on my tongue like rot.
Peter, how does it feel to get paid for your work?
There are rumors freedom's coming for us all.
Freedom, you know that's all I want.
Chloe, careful. Real men would rather sell you across the river to America than let you go free.
Then I'll run.
I've run before. Maybe this time for good.
No! No! Just get her into a boat. No!
Chloe! Chloe, no!
Let me go! No!
Word of Chloe Cooley's resistance led to Canada's first legislation limiting slavery. After 200 years, slavery was abolished in Canada in 1834.
John Ware was one of the first Black pioneers in the prairies. He was known for his courage, physical strength, ability to train horses, and his incredible ranching techniques. Filmmaker Cheryl Fogo and her brother Richard grew up in Calgary in the 1960s. They were the descendants of Black pioneers who settled in Alberta and Saskatchewan a couple of decades after John Ware made his name in the Calgary area.
For Richard and I, it was our fantasy world. We never played anything else. We would sit on the kitchen table and tie our scarves to the chairs, and the chairs were the horses, the table was our wagon, and we would play for hours and have all kinds of adventures.
John Ware was part of a small first wave of immigration of free Black men and women from the United States. He was hired to move 3,000 head of cattle to Sir Hugh Allen's Northwest Cattle Co. in the foothills southwest of Calgary.
It was the first really large cattle drive, and it was the beginning of the establishment of Alberta as an agricultural economy and driver. So you would have to say that John Ware was part of Alberta's very first industry.
Although slavery had ended, Ware still faced discrimination. There are documented stories of Ware being refused entry to establishments in Calgary and of him being asked to pay double the price for land as white ranchers.
That was a heritage where I did not see myself reflected at all. The cowboy stories, that was a white world. Our history belongs to all of us and would really help us to understand who we are as Canadians if we had a better understanding of who we've been all along.
Black pioneer families built communities and shaped Canada's West. Today, John Ware has a school named after him. 2 creeks carry his name. You can hike on the John Ware mountain ridge. There's even a Canadian stamp with his face on it. The cowhand lived from around 1850 to 1905, and in that time, against all odds, made a life and created a legacy here in Canada. But he wasn't alone. Marie-Joseph Angelique was a Black enslaved woman charged with one of the most infamous crimes in Quebec's history. Marie-Joseph Angelique tried to run away with her lover, a white man named Claude Thibault, but they were caught and returned to Montreal. He went to prison. She was returned to her slave owner, Madame de Francheville. About 2 months later, a fire broke out and destroyed the city.
Alors, ce qu'on sait, c'est que le 10 avril...
What we know is that April 10th is a Saturday, and Madame de Francheville is way uptown in church for evening prayers. And Marie-Joseph Angelique is on the doorstep. And then, all of a sudden, someone shouts fire.
Fire, 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 fire.
And it spread to the rest of the merchants' quarter. It burned down the merchants' quarter. And also the hospital, Hotel Dieu, and many other buildings.
And 3 hours later, so around 10, 11 o'clock at night, 46 houses have been destroyed.
Rumors quickly began to circulate that it was Thibault and Angelique who set fire to Madame de Francheville's house. And then the next day,
they arrested her. They took her to court the following morning, and she was charged with the fire.
Despite little evidence, Marie-Joseph Angelique was found guilty, tortured, and sentenced.
It was Marie-Joseph Angelique against the world.
She was paraded through the streets of Montreal in a white chemise with the word incendiaire, or arsonist, embroidered on it, to face her hanging.
And all this in front of an enormous crowd. There was no entertainment in New France. That was the entertainment. And then they took down her body and burned it.
No one knows for sure if Angelique set the fire, yet we know how she died. We know how she lived, too. She was enslaved, along with more than 4,000 African and Indigenous people, bought and sold in Canada.
Hear them calling for your fire. Hear them calling, calling, crawling, crawling for.
I see
see this paper fell from somebody, and it have as kind of like advertising for recruiting people to Canada. And I hold this piece of paper. I didn't give it to anybody. I hold on to it. I couldn't wait to get home to send in an application for that thing.
To come to Canada?
To come to Canada.
The West Indian Domestic Scheme was a government policy that invited thousands of women from the West Indies to settle in Canada starting in 1955. My mom wasn't a part of the West Indian Domestic Scheme, at least not officially. She came on the wave of immigration created by the scheme. She too came as a domestic worker.
For the leaving, it was hard. It was really hard.
My mom arrived in Canada, settled in with the family who had sponsored her, started doing domestic work for them, and then found a permanent spot. It was with a woman re-entering the workforce.
That was like a house job with an extremely big house with 3 kids.
So they were little, these kids.
Yeah, and the girl was 8 and the baby was about 9 months or something.
My mom was lucky. Sure, there was some indignity attached to her work, like the family insisting on calling her Ava, even though her name is Eva. She didn't complain, though. And overall, she ended up with a good family that treated her well and paid well. That wasn't always the case for the domestic workers who came over with the scheme. One of my earliest childhood memories, maybe my very earliest, was reuniting with my mother in Canada after her long absence from our lives.
From his future, for his
I was a baby, just 3 years old. She was a stranger to me in this cold foreign land. She had been gone for half of my life. I think about the West Indian Domestic Scheme and the thousands of women who came before, during, and after it. And the same reunion scenario playing out again and again.
Many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand, but I know the future, and I know who holds my hand.
Oh, that's a nice song. Yes, hear, hear, Dad. That's right, hear, hear.
Where the pavement ended, Africville began. There have been black people in Halifax as long as there's been a Halifax. They helped build the city, formerly enslaved people and free black men and women, maroons. Together, they dug out its roads and raised its roof beams. Facing racism in town, black people settled at the city limits. They built homes and started families. They set up their own school and other services the city refused to provide. They built the Seaview United Baptist Church, the beating heart of the community. Despite paying city taxes, Africvillians had no running water, electricity, paved roads, or sewers. Instead, the city built factories, sewage pits, and a prison nearby, then labeled the village a slum. In 1962, Halifax City Council voted to demolish Africville, taking its valuable land for industrial development. The bulldozers arrived as Africville lay sleeping. By 1970, the neighborhood was destroyed, and its residents forcibly relocated to other Halifax neighborhoods. But Africville was home to the people who lived there, and they would not be forgotten. Once a year, we venture out to Africville for a reunion. Set up your tent, set up your camp, or throw a blanket on the grass. The children are playing, people are laughing and hugging, reminiscing about the old days. But for 3 days, you have your community back. Despite the steady wages and the adventure of travel, the work was not easy. We left our families for weeks at a time, sleeping no more than 3 hours a night. Porters were at every passenger's beck and call. We had no identification to wear. When passengers wanted your attention, they just called you George. My name's not George. In 1943, we joined the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. For the first time, we had job security, reduced work hours, increased wages, and above all, some dignity. Later, the Brotherhood negotiated, and finally each porter was issued 2 plastic name cards placed in wall holders at each end of the sleeping car, inviting passengers to call us by our names.
My dad was a railway porter. It was just about the only job a black man could get. But he had big plans for us. Music would be our ticket out of poverty. I knew we couldn't afford that piano, so I practiced twice as hard.
Nice, Daisy. Okay, Oscar, let's hear it.
Turns out, I wasn't half bad. Then I found jazz, or it found me. It wasn't all easy, though. I faced a lot of hate, but I found my stage. They call me the man with 4 hands. Well, I don't know about that, but let's see how far this ticket takes me.
From Montreal to Carnegie Hall and far beyond, Oscar Peterson became one of the most recorded and celebrated jazz musicians of all time.
It was a beautiful idea, the promise of free, fertile land in Western Canada. At the turn of the century, many Black Oklahomans wanted a part of it. The Canadian government wanted to settle those vast Western provinces, long occupied by Indigenous peoples. They called this dream the last best West. With the means and skills to make the move north, many Black Oklahomans were eager for a new life. They wanted to get away from the increasing wave of racial violence and discrimination that hung over their lives. Canada, however, was not so eager to receive them. The Department of the Interior was already working behind the scenes to keep Black Americans out of Canada, including the deliberate spread of disinformation. And while the department answered few inquiries from Black settlers, it made a point of telling them they wouldn't do as well as white settlers in the harsh Canadian climate. The government even hired agents to prevent Black Oklahomans from immigrating. These agents met with influential local Black community leaders, hosted lectures, wrote editorials, and met with interested individuals and families, sharing false information along the way. One agent was a Black American doctor named G.W. Miller. In an editorial, Miller spread horror stories about Canada, calling it a desolate, frigid, unsettled place where 3 fates awaited Black people: poverty, mistreatment, and freezing to death. He also described the abuses that border agents could inflict on Black women and girls. About 1,000 Black Oklahomans settled in the Canadian prairies. But for many others, the promise of the last best West soured. The agents wrote to the Department of the Interior that the Canadian boom was dying out. That example of disinformation is more than a century old. These days, we have even more channels through which information and disinformation reach us. Even a simple social media post can have enormous influence. Whether it's the words of an influential expert in 1911 or a story trending on social media today, question what you see, hear, and read. Think critically about the messages fighting for your attention.
Whenever anyone asks me why I am part of the women's liberation movement, I always reply, because I am a woman. What they've said to me is that since I am a black person, black oppression is the only oppression with which they expect me to concern myself. But for me not to participate in the women's liberation movement would be to deny my womanhood.
Rosemary Brown was born in Jamaica into a family of strong, educated women. She came to Canada in 1951 to attend university. As a student at McGill and later the University of British Columbia, Rosemary faced pervasive discrimination. It was through adversity that she found her purpose as a leader against racism and sexism.
Indeed, I'm twice blessed. I am black and I'm a woman. And to be black and female in a society which is both racist and sexist is to be in the unique position of having nowhere to go but up.
By the mid-1960s, Rosemary was married, had 3 children, and 3 university degrees, including a master's in social work. She was a member of the BC Association for the Advancement of Colored People and appeared regularly as a panelist on the nationally syndicated series People in Conflict.
Unless the women's liberation movement supports the struggles of the poor, of the oppressed races, of the old and other disadvantaged groups in society, it will never achieve its goals. Not to do so would be to isolate itself from the masses of women that make up a large segment of all these groups.
In 1972, she made history by becoming the first black woman elected to a Canadian legislature. She made history again in 1975 when she became the first black woman to run for leadership of a federal political party. Rosemary Brown served as the member of the Legislative Assembly for Vancouver-Burrard until 1986. During her 14-year career in provincial politics, she pushed for legislation to prohibit gender-based discrimination and worked toward improving services for immigrants, people with disabilities, the elderly, and other marginalized groups. Rosemary's years in office showed women from all backgrounds that they could make a difference. In the following years, more women held positions on boards and commissions across British Columbia.
This country, Canada, is beautiful and strong only because of the people of both sexes and of all races. And its strength and its beauty will increase only to the extent that it is able to accept and respect all of its people equally.
Hey, Mr. Ricky.
Boys, I want you to meet someone. Outstanding athlete, the former 2nd Lieutenant in the United States Army, and your new second baseman, Jackie Robinson.
Hi, gentlemen.
Et maintenant, va tomber pour you. And now batting for the Royals, le deuxième but, the second baseman, Jackie Robinson. Quatrième manche, 4th inning.
Record numbers of cheering Montrealers helped Jackie Robinson break baseball's color bar that year. He never forgot the city that launched his journey to baseball's Hall of Fame.
All I wanted was to see a movie. One down, please.
I can't sell downstairs tickets to you people.
How dare they? I could afford to buy the more expensive ticket. I run my own business. But they refused to take my money. They left me there all night. On what charge? They said I didn't pay the theater tax. But it was really about color.
Sister Desmond, appeal this conviction and your community will stand behind you.
Do you have any idea what this will do to us?
So what are you going to do? Make it right.
Viola Desmond's case inspired Nova Scotia's civil rights movement. She was pardoned 63 years later based on the injustice of her conviction.
Richard Pierpoint was enslaved in Senegal and taken to America.
All us men have sworn on this petition to fight.
You're an old man. The British Army has militias and trained soldiers.
I fought with the British during the American Revolution.
Take your land and farm it. Leave the Americans to us.
With respect, sir. I was born a free man, and I intend to die one. Your officers fight for land and money. I fight for my freedom.
Richard Pierpoint was one of thousands of black loyalists who won their freedom in the American Revolution. 30 years later, at the age of 68, he petitioned for an all-black unit that would defend Upper Canada during the War of 1812.